Hello everyone, I'm Joelle, the Travel Client Partner at Awin, and welcome. I'm very excited to be hosting our Global Travel webinar today. The next hour will be packed with sector trends, followed by an interactive discussion with our panel of experts. On that panel, we have a fantastic selection of guests incorporating perspectives from across the industry. I'll briefly introduce the panel now, but we'll go back into formal introductions before the discussions. We have with us today Colin, the Director of Weather to Travel, Alicia, the Industry Consultant from SimilarWeb, who will also be joining me in our Insights section, Bertha, Head of Affiliates at Last Minute, Kate, Business Development Manager at Travel Payouts, and Greg, Executive VP at Chateau 20. I'll be speaking to each of our panellists shortly and putting a series of questions to them, but we'd also like to hear from you. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please do type them within the Q&A panel within the webinar. And as part of the audience, you can also upvote these questions. We'll get through as many as we possibly can within the next hour. First of all, I want to give you a quick insight into the trends that we've tracked across Awin within the travel sector and provide some initial context for our discussion. I'll then pass you on to Alicia from SimilarWeb, who will share some trends on a regional level, as well as the differences that they are seeing across domestic and international travel. So, as years go, this one's been pretty memorable to date. We've seen disruption across the whole globe, and travel is no exception. This graph shows us the change in sales volumes within the travel sector year to date by month versus 2019. As we can see, we started the year strong as a sector, up 13% in terms of sales volumes versus January peak. However, as news of COVID-19 hit, borders closed and flights grounded, we saw a substantial decline in performance. February bookings were down 3% versus last year, and March bookings down 57% versus 2019. Bringing us closer to date, April and May saw bookings 90% down in terms of total sales volumes versus the same months the previous year. However, I've taken a look at some of the other KPIs in the sector, and with every story, if you look for them, the positives can be found. Looking at May in detail, while sales were down 90%, traffic was less so at 75%, and consumers are still browsing for travel content and inspiration. Conversion rate hit 2.5% versus the 6.8% we saw in May 2019. AOV within the sector is up largely, hitting €225 in May. That's €67 up versus the AOV we saw in May 2019. It's apparent that while less consumers are purchasing bookings, those who are spending within the travel space are spending more on average per booking. ROI is also up by 11% year on year, hitting €25. Whilst many travel brands have understandably had to pull back from investment during this time, those who are able to invest in the space are seeing a stronger return. Whilst consumers are still browsing the travel landscape, I wanted to better understand the differences in performance by subsector year on year. This graph combines April and May traffic across the travel sector, understanding the changes year on year on a subsector level. The graph is also ordered by year on year increase or decrease from left to right. Year on year, whilst volumes are still low, the only sectors to see an increase in traffic are recreation and insurance. Insurance saw our biggest increase, up fourfold. This consumer fear and desire to stay safe aligns with the statistics that we've seen from Google. And Google reported this week seeing searches for "is flying safe right now" up 300%. As you can see, travel agencies are one of our largest subsectors within the travel space at Awin, seeing a decrease in traffic by 77%. Shortly followed by the size of airlines at Awin that saw an 80% drop in consumer browsing year on year. As well as wanting to understand what consumers are browsing, it's also important for us to understand where they are browsing. This graph showcases global traffic split by publisher type across the travel sector year to date. As you can see, traffic within the sector was decreasing month on month. However, between April to May, we did see an increase. What's even more interesting is the differences across these promotional types. Publishers classified as content have seen an increase in the share of traffic since lockdown. Content share of traffic sat at 39% at the beginning of the year. However, in April and May, the content share of traffic went up 6 percentage points, hitting 45% of all travel sector traffic. This share seems to have been taken from our loyalty and offers space. Loyalty and offers share of traffic sat at 25% at the beginning of the year. However, in April and May has dropped 7 percentage points to 18% of all travel traffic globally. It's clear that during this time, consumers are less focused on deals and offers when it comes to travel, and instead crave information and advice, as well as inspiration to support their dreams of future vacations to come. So, when will we see normality within the travel space resume? The data in this visual is shared from one of our larger global travel clients within the travel space. As you can see, we've compared the trend line of bookings with the percentage cancellation rate by day over the last few months. Throughout March, Donald Trump began advising US citizens to stay home, and by the end of the month, 30 out of 50 states were in lockdown. These lockdown announcements drove cancellation rates up and booking rates down throughout March and April. However, I was extremely excited to begin to see these trends reverse towards the end of May. From mid-May, we can see there's a constant descent in cancellation rate. And on the 27th of May, we saw the lines on the graph cross again as cancellation rate dropped below booking volumes. We hadn't seen this trend since early March. Of course, fewer bookings means there would be fewer cancellations, but it's likely that with the news of some borders reopening, less cancellations are being processed, and the overall percentage cancellation rate is down. At Awin, as well as tracking our core performance KPIs, we also offer custom tracking. Put simply, this sector-level additional tracking allows our clients to pass back any extra information that's important to them when understanding and achieving their wider business goals. The graph above looks at some of this custom travel tracking across one of our US clients within the space. This client in particular passes us back stay date information when the booking is confirmed. Similar to the previous slide, we saw unusual performance during March and April, and by April, the lag time between booking and stay date had almost doubled what we had seen comparative to prior COVID-19. But since the end of May, we begin to see some normality in the data. The number of days consumers are booking has dropped again, back to a normal rate of around 40 to 50 days. If you're interested in Awin sector custom parameter functionality, do reach out to myself or your account management team. And before we move on, I wanted to quickly run through a couple of the key updates on a destination level across the globe. I took most of these dates from UK newspaper articles as well as the website Wanderlust. However, I do wish Wanderlust used less picturesque images when informing me of the borders that are closed throughout the globe. Spain, from the 1st of July, are allowing people to travel abroad, including tourists, and they'll no longer have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine when arriving in Spain. In Germany, border controls were already eased from the 15th of May, and Austria, France and Switzerland are said to be lifted from the 15th of June. Italy just yesterday saw borders reopen and ended regional travel restrictions. Greece, travelling to the Greek islands resumed from the 25th of May, but not for foreign tourists. From the 1st of July, Greece is set to lift their 2-week quarantine. And Portugal, foreign ministers are hinting air bridges could be in place by July, and they're really keen to welcome tourists back. Finally, in the UK, our 14-day quarantine plans for travellers are still set to be imposed from the 8th of June. And in the US, the travel ban continues across the whole state, as well as travel bans from Europe and the UK. I'll now pass you over to Alicia to cover off some of our regional sector trends, as well as the differences between domestic and travel.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joelle. That was a great overview of what's happening in the travel space. So I'm going to go into some web traffic as well as bookings from the similar web platform, and we can go to the next slide. But essentially, I'll be showing some data from our new travel intelligence platform. And this platform is able to track bookings at an origin as well as a destination level. And what I've done here is segmented out domestic versus overall bookings, or domestic versus international overall bookings in different regions. And unsurprisingly, every region has become increasingly domestic over the past 4 months. But what we're seeing is that in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, which have traditionally been places where citizens are more used to international travel, they actually have the lowest percentages of domestic bookings versus overall bookings. So what we're seeing, I think, in the travel space, as Joelle mentioned, is that in Europe, as we're starting to lift travel restrictions, as countries are starting to build travel bubbles or travel bridges, we're going to start seeing traffic pick up again for international travel. And I think that that is a really, really hopeful sign. As we look more at North America and APAC, we're seeing that in North America, we've always kind of had domestic travel be the majority of travel. So even if you look back at April of 2019, or really all of 2019, domestic travel hovered around 80% of total travel. So we will not be hit as hard, I think, as APAC regions, which are much more heavily reliant on international travel. Their consumers or their citizens like to go to the US, especially, as well as Europe. So we're going to start seeing, I think, that because of a lot of the bans that are happening in APAC, recently Japan actually had reimposed a state of emergency in April, and then imposed regional travel bans as well as external travel bans. And then there's been continuing bans pretty much across the region. I think that that's going to be where we're going to see a lot of impacts, whereas the Middle East, Africa, and Europe will start to resume international travel a little bit faster than the rest of the world. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So basically, I think what this says is really just emphasizes my point that in North America and in the US especially, we as consumers are used to traveling in country. We're used to taking road trips. We're used to going between states and maybe not doing as much international travel. We have a lot less vacation days than the rest of the world. So for all of 2019, 80% of bookings made from the US were for destinations in the US. And then in terms of international travel, we had a pretty varied assortment of countries that we were going to. And now about 97% of our travel is in the US, but compared to a place like Italy, where in April of 2019, about 60% of bookings were for destinations in Italy, and now about 90%. We are doing, I think, a lot better than other regions that are much more used to international travel and kind of reliant on that. And then when we actually look at specific countries, so these are the countries with the most bookings worldwide. I didn't include the US just because it has a significant amount more of bookings, so it would kind of dwarf these countries. But what we're seeing here is a few really interesting things. So we're seeing that the UK actually in April of 2020 had 3 times more international travel than the rest of the countries shown here. And that is really because of some of the kind of liftings to restrictions. I think as we've seen that the UK put in another quarantine, we're going to see that the percentage of international travel is going to decrease. But Japan actually had 3 times as many bookings in general as the rest of this competitive set in April of 2020. And that is because of their Golden Week, which is a huge holiday week in the country. And because they had really implemented restrictions a lot later. So I've been working with a few of our Japanese clients, and it's an interesting situation there, as I mentioned, because they recently reimposed the state of emergency. They have a travel ban in effect probably until the end of June, and then they're exploring different probably country bubbles, hopefully between Australia, Taiwan, maybe even the US, depending on kind of relations between the countries. But I think that what this is showing here is that, as I think what we can expect as we get into May, is that in the US and the UK, and Japan, we're going to still see that bookings are mostly domestic, but around the world, we're going to start seeing much more international percentage of bookings. And then when we actually look at provider share in the US, what we're seeing is that a lot of the major OTAs are losing market share to suppliers, Airbnb, and other smaller providers, and that would include VRBO as well. So what we're seeing here is that this is the US provider market share. Hilton almost tripled its share of bookings year over year. Suppliers have had really strong conversions, and suppliers normally do have very strong conversions, mostly because of their loyalty programs, previously because of business travel. But really what we're seeing here is that this loyalty has kind of remained throughout the pandemic. And then the thing to remember here too is that anyone who's booking right now is not necessarily a traveler. It could be someone who's quarantining themselves. It could be someone who has to make necessary travel accommodations. So I think that's something to just remember in general. But in terms of actual bookings, we are seeing, I'll show you a little bit later, we are seeing a pickup, a slow but steady recovery, which is exciting. And this is what I was speaking to. So we looked here at the first week of May compared to the first week of April. So bookings in April were about 80% lower than bookings in February, but I wanted to kind of zoom in and just look at what was happening. And we saw here that Marriott actually more than doubled converted visits after articles came out featuring the hotel chain for its Global Cleanliness Council. And then Airbnb had a pretty significant incline right before Easter weekend. We actually have an updated version of this chart up until May 31st. And when you look at that, what you start to see is that Airbnb and Vrbo are really owning the amount of the traffic share right now. So Vrbo has had significant increases, passing almost any other accommodations provider. And I think that what this is showing us is that in the kind of battle of hotels versus vacation rentals are coming out on top. And we've seen that Airbnb in particular has been really proactive and made a lot of moves to ensure that consumers feel safe in their accommodations. So examples of this would be they rolled out new cleanliness standards. They require a 24-hour minimum period between stays to make sure that vacation rentals are sanitized properly. So one of the concerns for consumers with a vacation rental is just, will it maintain the same standard of cleanliness as a hotel? And we're seeing that vacation rental providers have really started to step up to the plate and tackle those questions head on. Whereas with hotels, I think people are concerned about being in very, not necessarily congested, but being in close proximity with a ton of other people. With vacation rentals, it's easier to go with maybe just one other family, book a place, and maybe get away for a weekend. I know anecdotally, I've been seeing a lot of my friends and family doing that. So I think in this new travel order, we will start to see that vacation rentals come out on top. So thank you. That is the bulk of my slides, and I will hand it back off to Joelle.
Thank you, Alicia. And it's really great to see that you're seeing some positive trends in the data as well, in the same way that Awin are. So fingers crossed we're on the turn for positivity now. So as mentioned, if you guys in the audience have any questions you'd like to ask, please do continue to submit them within the Q&A. And if you want anyone in particular in the panel to answer them, do just add their names in as well. So now to formally introduce our panel. So as mentioned, we have Colin with us from Weather to Travel, an inspirational travel content publisher offering weather guides for every country in the world and helping consumers decide where and when they want to go on holiday. Alicia from SimilarWeb, the data and insights firm that gives partners the global multi-device market intelligence that they need to understand, track and grow their digital market share. Berta from lastminute.com, a leading online travel brand, which since its launch in 1998 has specialised in creating amazing experiences and unforgettable memories for customers, including everything from hotels, city breaks, holidays, theatre, entertainment and spa days. Kate from Travel Payouts, the travel-focused affiliate sub-network, features a wide selection of the biggest travel brands across the whole world. And last but no means least, Greg from Chateau 20, a US-based agency that specialises in developing performance marketing programs for major brands in hospitality, entertainment and lifestyle industries, including Caesars Entertainment. Perfect. So let's jump into a few questions. So before we dive into what's happening in lockdown, I sort of wanted to just touch on some pre-lockdown trends. So Colin, I wondered if I could come to you first. So up until the enforced travel restrictions and before the lockdown policies were enacted, how was 2020 performing for you as a content publisher? And which products or destinations were you seeing positive growth in?
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I guess we turn back to January of 2020. We just navigated Brexit negotiations in the UK, so we'd kind of got through the uncertain times that we were having within the travel industry. We were all looking forward to a quite positive year as the news in the coronavirus was already on the news by that point, but most people weren't really too worried about its impact across the world. And in fact, we saw that in our performance. So January was excellent for us. You know, we saw quite a positive bounce off the back of Brexit. It's usually our busiest time of the year anyway, so we were seeing good growth. In fact, we broke records for January. Across the board, so it was a very positive start. In terms of products, I guess for us, obviously we're firmly placed in the leisure market for people booking holidays, so we were seeing your typical bucket and spade destinations for UK travellers, so the Med, the Canaries, as well as long haul destinations such as the Caribbean, the US, into Asia and Bali and India and so forth, and into Australia. So for us, it was a typical January, but also a very positive one. So it was obviously what happened since then has been considerably detrimental to us all. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Colin. And I suppose, yeah, bringing us up a bit closer to what's happening now. Berta, I wondered if we could get your perspective from an advertiser point of view. So as an OTA offering lots of different travel products to consumers, have you seen distinct differences in the performance for those individual products and categories over your site in the last couple of months?
So basically, we saw a change in all the travel sector, in all the products. So for us, in a really short time of period of 3 weeks, we dropped 95% of bookings of reservations. We also went from 15,000 bookings per day to 1,000. And the most highlighted one is the cancellation that you were commenting before. For us, it was 3,000 bookings per month cancel. And after the breakdown, it was 300,000 per month. So all of these numbers are impacting all products. It's true that flights was the one which lasts a little bit longer because people still needed to go back home. Yeah. So they were willing still to travel. So we definitely saw everything being really impacted and changed. So we tried to adapt, bringing a little bit of flexibility to give flexible products, free cancellation, and extend a little bit the search machine. So you can look for 2021 holidays And like this, we could keep a little bit on the bookings, and now we see a recovery, the one that you commented, we also see it on our site.
Yeah, thank you for that, Berta. I suppose, Kate, if we come to you next, I suppose we've got lots of publishers in the audience and we're talking about the impact that we're seeing at the moment. As a sub-network, have you guys managed to navigate these changes, and how are you supporting publishers who are currently affected?
Yeah, sure. It is obvious that we were affected a lot, like heavily, like any other company in the travel industry. And we quickly understood that, unfortunately, we were not going to make as much money as we used to. So we just decided that our main strategy here is to stay positive and to stay positive and to do whatever it takes to prepare when everything gets back to normal. For example, to educate our affiliates, to support them, and as I've said, like our main value is our affiliates, and we really wanted to keep this community just to support them, both financially, because at some point of time we decided to cover their COVID commissions out of our funds, just to support them and to make them stay, if not with travel payouts, but within the travel community in this vertical. And also mentally, because we had a lot of different webinars, and we even had this, as we call it, survival kit for travel bloggers, where we gave some recommendations, where we gave some predictions, and our predictions are based on the predictions of IATA, because we do believe that they're most trustworthy, and where we kind of described this whole situation, what was going on, and if you are a publisher, you're not the only one who's struggling.
Yeah, perfect. And I suppose whilst I have you, have you seen more travel brands shifting towards the performance based marketing during this time, I suppose, for more efficiencies in terms of advertising budgets?
Just different. I would say like 50-50, because in the beginning, like in March, we saw that some advertisers, not only our advertisers, but like in general, they cut commissions, and some of them closed their affiliate networks and their affiliate programs. And that was pretty strange and probably not a very wise step to take. Because it was really unfair towards a lot of affiliates, because, for example, you are an affiliate and have a whole website covered with affiliate links, and now just somebody tells you that they can't convert anymore. So it was like one side of the story. On the other hand, I'm responsible for new advertisers at travel payouts, and before the crisis, I had been chasing for some companies for weeks, for months. And they usually said that they had no time for this. And now they had all the time in the world for an integration with us. So that was a very positive thing for me. So I would say like a 50-50. And also we saw some creativity from our advertisers, because in the vertical of tours and activities, some companies just came up with the idea of online excursions. And first, people were just pretty skeptical about this initiative. But then, to our surprise, they convert very well. So.
Yeah, I love that idea, and actually I've seen a couple of like virtual museums and virtual concerts and other stuff. So yeah, virtual excursions is definitely something to put on my list for the next couple of weeks. Thank you. Alicia, if I could come to you quickly, we could dive back into some more trends. So have you guys seen any distinct differences or changes in how travel brands have been trying to get traffic to their site, or the different types of traffic that are coming to their site during the crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think actually going off of what you were both speaking to with virtual experiences, one of the best players there right now is Airbnb, which really kind of bulked up its online experiences platform. And we were able to track that through our platform, and they had just insane growth when they launched it. And the growth has actually been sustained. A lot of providers are making a ton of money, or a lot of experience providers. So these are kind of homegrown experiences, are making a ton of money through the platform. And it's been a really, really strong initiative for them. I think that going off of that with just Airbnb specifically, because they've been making a lot of really kind of powerful, quick moves, they really have focused as well on long-term stays. So they're starting to promote that on their website. And we're starting to see more searches for that as well. I think that in this new travel world, we're going to see that consumers want to go to places and really experience the culture more, stay there for longer, and they might be forced to stay there for longer just given the state of quarantines. A few other things that we have seen, and this goes back to your point on the increase in content with regards to loyalty programs, Joelle. We've seen that loyalty programs, when they're kind of used in the right way, can generate a lot of traffic. So S7 is an airline in Russia, and they had this awesome promotion in March where you could earn loyalty points by logging into the platform and proving you were staying at home. So it was this amazing initiative, and it's kind of the antithesis, right, of an airline's brand, but they were really kind of pushing to make sure that consumers were staying safe, staying at home, and if you logged into the platform, you were able to gain a certain amount of points. And they had just an extreme increase in traffic. It was around like 100 or 200% to their site. They were doing so well. So that's top of the funnel. At the bottom of the funnel, we actually we're looking at some kind of Vegas resorts, and MGM and Caesars are kind of the two major players in Vegas. And I know we have someone who's a little bit more knowledgeable in the space, so I won't speak too much there, but we saw that MGM increased converted visits and had about 30% more converted visits than Caesars in April and March. And the two players usually fight pretty head to head, but the reason for this increase was a lot of the traffic for MGM was going specifically to its M Rewards loyalty program. So this is something that I think is a little bit undervalued right now. I think that a lot of travel companies don't really think about how consumers they still want to build up their loyalty points, and they still want to kind of think about travel in the future. And I think that the travel companies that have the strongest loyalty programs are going to come out ahead just because they've already built that really strong relationship with their consumers. My last example that I thought was really interesting is that we noticed an uptick in traffic to Booking.com in Japan from a discount marketplace called Point Town, and it's a huge discount marketplace in Japan, and it had never previously given any traffic to Booking, and then all of a sudden in April, it made up almost all of Booking's referral traffic. And it's interesting to see that because I think that this is an example of an affiliate partnership that Booking was using to advertise cheaper prices, probably on flights, through this discount marketplace. And it definitely worked. It drove traffic to Booking's site, and it drove a significant amount of visits. So I think there's a bunch of different kind of strategies that providers are taking, and they're all working. They're all very different, but they all kind of revolve around a few different things. So for Airbnb, it's really exploring kind of how to connect more with their consumers through virtual experiences and long-term stays. For Booking, it's what partnerships can they use to kind of capitalize maybe on some of the consumer interest in discounts and then more relaxed cancellation policies. And then for other players, it's really focusing in on their loyalty programs and making sure that they keep consumers engaged even when they're kind of forced to stay at home.
Yeah. Thank you, Alicia. I love that campaign about getting consumers to stay home. I hadn't spotted that one. I had spotted the Netflix campaign where they had billboards out on the street with spoiler alerts of what was happening in some of the top documentaries or series that people were watching. But that's really cool from a travel perspective to see somebody get involved as well.
Yeah, that's a great campaign. I think there's a lot of creative marketing going on right now, so it's really cool to see.
Definitely. Thank you. Greg, a couple of topics come up that I think I actually want to pick your brains on, if that's okay. So Alicia touched on some of the trends that we're seeing across Vegas. I know that Caesars Entertainment recently announced their plans to reopen their casinos and resorts. Do you anticipate seeing much inbound travel to Vegas and of the early phases of reopening?
Well, you know what's funny? Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for entertaining this beard. I've never had a beard before. I could blame it on being lazy. I could blame it on not needing to shave. I could even blame it on binge watching The Last Kingdom on Netflix. Whatever reason, it's a new thing for me. Probably not a permanent thing. So thank you for that. that's responding more to the question. When you guys first engaged me about joining the panel, I was hesitant. My initial concern was, am I really going to tout bad news? Like, is that what people want to hear? Because if you think about it, at least that, think a month ago even, the idea of getting together and being with a bunch of strangers, advertising 101, right? A good ad makes you want to be there. I'm not even a drinker, but you see those Budweiser ads, you want to be in that bar, right? But now that's not where the world is or was or trying to move away from, but you get where I'm going. So you would think that Vegas would be the last thing you'd want to talk about in this tough time. However, the last couple of weeks, as Caesars has announced, Caesars is one of our biggest customers, and ironically, I did spend a good amount of years leading marketing there for not too long ago. So I was on the brand side for Caesars for some years, and now they're a client of Chateau's. That said, we are seeing way better than expected interest. And frankly, I chalk up the fact that we all just want to get out and shave and just want to get back to partying and living. So as we're seeing a whole lot of interest, a whole lot of transactions surging in, way better than forecasting. So yeah, I think it's going to come back online sooner than expected. I have my own personal concerns about where and when that plateaus. But that said, what does entertainment look like, right? What does live shows all the way through gambling and other forms of spas and amenities, what does that look like? I mean, I have a perspective, but I don't want to dominate too much time. But by all means, any pointed questions, I'm happy to give you some thoughts.
Brilliant, thank you. And whilst I have you, something that came up in the last couple of discussions was like streaming events and virtual events. And I suppose from your perspective in terms of the entertainment space, do you think that's going to become a normal practice? And I suppose, do we think venues are going to be limited to small capacities for much longer?
I might antagonize some of my friends and peers by saying this, but I do think they're going to, they being the Live Nations, the AEGs, the Caesars. Caesars is the third largest entertainment promoter in North America. A lot of people don't realize that, with all the residence shows and such. That said, I do think there will be lots of attempts for some time to live stream, but it's just like the pre-recorded concerts you see on Netflix and such, or HBO before that. I feel like it gets some attention, but I don't feel like it gets anywhere near the thrill of being there live, right? So I don't think it's really going to compensate. I think we're just going to keep trying. I do think that there's an interesting trend I've seen in a few different cultures. I saw something out of Korea just recently where there was this kind of 360 stage, and there was an artist on stage, a performer, and all you saw were faces like I see below on my screen right now. I see all your beautiful faces. What all you saw were thousands of faces just watching the live streaming. And I imagine them getting bigger and smaller and rotating through, like zeroing in on guests. Like that's the closest thing to a progressive live stream concert I can imagine. And that seems kind of cool. This talks about, my days at MSG, we would be all on top of each other, and booths were like this elite thing. I think everything's got to start to feel, at least in the near future, some level of compartmentalization or separation. That is until there's a clear, clean, comfortable flag in the ground of either there's a medicine, what's the word I'm looking for? A clear treatment for this, or we've all built up immunity. Then I think everyone's just going to surge back recklessly and not care at all. But until then, I do think there'll be a slow crawl. But here's been an interesting trend that I definitely am not surprised to see, is the outside experience. So I think Vegas being an interesting just case study in that it's really almost a one industry town, right? It's all about entertainment. And most of those resorts, since we're talking about Caesars has never closed since they opened in the 60s, right? It's never had a day closed until this. So, I do think that that being the state, the situation of the state being this one industry town, it's a scary time. But luckily, this is all happening near the summer. And I do think the outdoor parties has always been a Vegas thing. And the heat supposedly kills this thing, and outside and space. I do think that the entertainment will shift very much to the big and outside kind of experience versus the traditional indoor concert look. festivals, live shows, pool parties, etc.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Greg. That was really useful. Berta, if I can come to you next, Greg was talking about his thoughts around how the travel industry will recover, and actually I wanted to get your thoughts as well from a brand perspective. So I suppose actually my question's twofold. So first of all, I'm really keen to see what trends you're expecting to see first from a brand perspective. But then also, I suppose, just changes on an ongoing basis, not just with the immediate release. So changes in terms of consumer adoption for digital bookings as opposed to bookings on the high street, and how you think that'll impact as well.
Yeah, I think we can answer these two questions a little bit together because they are much related. So basically, the COVID-19 has changed completely the travel industry. And a lot of changes are going to come. Now, for example, from the past years, the pricing was the main point for the client. All users were looking for the best offers, and this is definitely going to change. So now safetiness is going to be the first that they are going to look like and flexibility. No, not just flexibility on the travel destinations, on the departure date, or maybe on the cancellation, also on the payment methods. No, so they're going to want to be safe. As well, related with the safetiness, they are going to look for a lot of hygiene, which places are going to be disinfected, or how is it going to be, like they are going to really be willing to know more about it. National tourism, for example, is going to be the first one that we see is going to be recovering, and the back to home. I think there was some of the questions also on the panel regarding that. So back to home is going to be one of the first things that everyone is going to be willing to do. And I think it's also going to be a lot on the road trips. And I think someone of you also commented on it, and definitely we are seeing that rental cars are going to increase, and all these products. Regarding, for example, the more like affiliates, like publishers, advertisers, so content is definitely going to change a lot. It's going to be less inspirational, and it's going to become much more practical, no? So now people want to know more about what is going on. So they are demanding to be clear about it, like where can they travel, when they can travel, which are the government regulations, which are the safety nets that these countries offering to them. So I think there was also some of the questions on the panel of how can you trade now as a publisher to travel. I think this is a good line to choose. So be a lot super practical with the content, as well trying to promote as much as possible this flexibility that most of the companies that are dedicated to the travel like us are offering to the clients.
Perfect. Thank you, Berta. Actually, Colin, it'd be quite useful to get your standpoint on some of those points raised as well. So we were talking about one, predictions for the future travel industry, which from your perspective would be really useful. And two, sorry, again, I keep double questioning people, but Berta spotted a question in the live Q&A around how publishers can tailor their content to make it sensitive at this time. And I wondered how you guys are doing that, whether to travel.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with that. Yeah, I mean, we identified quite early on that there was going to be a need for information. You know, we're kind of in uncharted territory as we are in terms of never having been through something like this before, and you know, consumers when they're looking to book travel, they want to feel safe. They want to have, they want to feel that they're going to be able to enjoy their holiday, if we're talking about holiday bookings in specifically. And so there is a need for, really good information about the destinations that they could be going to. So, we realized that quite early on. We put together a new section for the site around travel advice, and also looked at how we could utilize the statistics that were being put out at that point around cases and deaths by destination. So we added that to the site to kind of complement the kind of information that we have for different destinations. And I think that is just going to get more more of a requirement, as previously discussed. So I think there will be a need for travellers to trust that they're going to be safe and secure. I think there would also be quite a lot of people who will be looking for deals because money might be tight. Obviously people are still looking to they may be furloughed, so they may have lost income, they may obviously be made redundant, but I think the majority of people who will still want to travel at some level. So I think for them, I think they will be looking to be very specific about what travel they do. If they're booking their one big holiday of the year, they will want to make sure they can get as much confidence in the destination, the hotel, the airline, whatever they're going to be doing, to make sure that goes to plan. It's a very fast changing world at the moment, so that something could be completely different in 2 days' time. So when it comes to the travel industry or the world itself. So I think trying to get away from this kind of misinformation and speculation around air bridges and the like, we need to help travelers to get as much information about what's going down on the ground, be it from local sources of information. I did pick up that the World Travel and Tourism Council had just launched their first kind of global safety and hygiene stamp that obviously the travel industry can then use to give people a bit of confidence that whatever they might be using, in every form of travel they're going to be taking, they can feel confident that they're going to have clean sheets and they're going to be safe in common areas within hotels and so on. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm hoping that by providing that kind of level of information, people will return to travel quite quickly. That was your second question, right? So the first part of the question, remind me what that was again. That was predictions, right?
Yeah, that was predictions. Thank you.
So as I said, it's very, very fast moving, incredibly difficult to predict, but don't mind having a go. Obviously, yesterday in the UK, the government announced the idea of this quarantine, which will start next week for 14 days when you return to the country or come into the country. There's been a lot of stuff in the press. I know a huge number of travel firms have complained that this is unnecessary, too late, and basically untenable in terms of a system. I think the government is going to push it through anyway, and we'll review it at the end of June. It looks like they will be trying to set up air bridges, which again is a term that maybe 3 weeks ago no one had even heard of. So we will see what happens. Obviously, I think someone mentioned earlier on that Portugal was potentially one that was interested in doing that with the UK. There's also been talk of Spain and France and Portugal and Greece, but they obviously have to be confident that we as a country in the UK are not going to be bringing in a risk to their country. So I think that is going to be quite critical. But actually above that, the Foreign Office advice, which currently sits as being advising against all travel that is not essential, or international travel that is not essential, that's almost even more important than the quarantine, because at the moment you won't get travel insurance. So for anyone who's thinking about traveling, you kind of need the double whammy of the Foreign Office advice changing and the quarantine dispersing. And then obviously you have to start looking at where, what the international borders, who's open, who's not, what rates they've got, are there flights there? The majority of the airlines aren't really going to be starting up until July. I think EasyJet was meant to be a bit earlier, but I think they're now starting to push back those dates. And I think all the major UK based airlines are going to be looking for July as being the first time. You're then getting very close to the beginning of the summer holidays in England. They would have already started for schools in Scotland. So there is a huge amount of kind of tick boxes that we need to go through before people will be able to return to travelling. And obviously then you have to look at what kind of procedures are in place within hotels and amenities, so restaurants and entertainment and so on. So I'm kind of optimistic that we will get a return and we will have some kind of summer and the market will kind of pick up slowly. I think people won't turn their back on holidays. I think they will continue to want to travel, but I think it will be a bit of a slow burner in terms of what the immediate summer holidays. I think staycations, domestic travel will be really important. We identified that quite early on as an area that we wanted to try and improve. So we enhanced our UK section of the website and also looked at Ireland, and we're now looking at France as another potential sector that could do really well for us in terms of people realizing that they can pack up the car, they can drive, go on the Eurotunnel, and without those touch points that they're going to be wanting to avoid. So I think we will have to see. We're kind of monitoring on a kind of a day-by-day basis at how it will start, but I think in terms of short term, I think we will get some travel happening sooner rather than later. The worry is kind of what it's doing to obviously the travel companies out there. We're losing companies quite regularly at the moment. Obviously we lost Shearings, the holiday company, last week, and today we lost kind of attractions company in the UK, which is 365 Tickets, which were had an affiliate program, and so we don't really know who's going to still be standing at the end of this. There's going to be a lot more. Obviously, there's a huge amount of pressure on those travel companies with tangible assets like airlines and hotel chains, who obviously have bricks and mortar that's costing the money every day, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be really struggling. But then it kind of filters down to the airports and to the travel extras and every other possible organisation in the chain. So I think we'll have to see what the new norm is, whenever that may be. And obviously there's a few more longer term kind of predictions which you can go into, but maybe we want to cover that a bit later on.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I'm sure there's many consumers just like myself are very grateful for the amount of expertise that you have yourself and on your website. So the sort of information and the way you've had to change your website dynamics, really interesting to hear. Thank you. Kate, I don't know if we can come to you next. I had one more question before we dive into some of the audience questions. And as we're talking about predictions, I wanted to focus maybe not just on the travel space, but the affiliate landscape. So do you expect our affiliate trends to change in the travel sector as a consequence in terms of long-term change?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that when we speak about affiliate trends, they are similar to travel trends in general. I think that because the situation kind of speeds up the process of travel going online and digital, because, for example, right now people would want to buy tickets online because of social distancing and stuff via different QR codes. So speaking of advertisers, we expect more of them to join affiliate networks. Even if, for example, advertisers used to work via CPC, they will probably change to CPA, because during the pandemic, CPC turned out to be a huge catastrophe because advertisers, they had to pay for clicks and they got nothing in return. So I believe that CPA and revenue share will be like more popular. And speaking of affiliates, we are going to see more diversity in their blogs, in their content, travel verticals, and offers that they choose. I think that's what Berta said. We expect, as an affiliate network, we expect vacation rentals, car rentals, and medical insurance to perform very well, because of obvious reasons. As for tours and activities, we think that probably providers will create some individual tours and little groups of tourists, not like groups of 20 people or 30 people, just again of social distancing and all the health crisis. And we are not really sure about the destiny of hostels, because I think that they will be brought to life like at the very last moment.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Just as we hit the 4 p.m. mark, so as we've added into the panel, we will be going on slightly just because we've had such a lot of audience questions come in. So thank you. But I just want to quickly cover off the one that's been most voted for and dive off. So our top voted question, which Alicia, I think you might be best placed to answer this because it's based on insights and demographics, but let me know if not. The question is, do you have any insights on the demographics of customers that are likely to travel first?
That's a great question. And we do have some insights there. So what we're seeing is that year over year in the US, month over month between March and April, so using the same travel intelligence platform, we saw that the share of bookings from the age groups 18 to 24, and then surprisingly 65 plus increased at the expense of about 34 to 55. So I think that it makes sense, right? When you think about the virus, younger age groups, they feel a little bit more invincible, and they feel maybe a little bit more willing to take the risks of kind of taking advantage of some of the cheaper deals that are happening or were happening in travel. So they're booking more accommodations relative to the rest of the population. And then the age groups that I mentioned before, about 34 to 55, they have a lot more that's at risk, right? They're kind of in that target age group where if you get coronavirus, it's a little bit more worrisome. And then usually at that point, you have a family, you have other people to take care of. You're probably not really willing to risk that for leisurely travel. But the most interesting thing was that the increase in share of bookings from 65 plus, and we actually saw this same phenomenon happen in Japan as well. And my hypothesis there is that might be a little bit more of a different situation. So I spoke earlier to people who are booking accommodations are not necessarily travelers. They could be people who kind of need to quarantine themselves or maybe get away from their extended family, and that is an extremely at-risk age group. So I think that might be what's happening with that age group. But really the younger age groups, 18 to 24, and then even like 24 to 34, those shares are increasing. So we're going to start seeing, I think, that people who like Colin was saying, people who are a little bit less, when people feel safe and when people feel less maybe impacted by the virus, they feel a little bit more willing to travel. And I think that we're going to start to see that those age groups are going to be the ones that take advantage of kind of some of what's happening in the travel world right now. Thank you.
That's so interesting. I presume that you would be the best person to ask that question to, and you were.
Thanks.
We have a really interesting question here about how brands are partnering with publishers. So Greg, I don't know from an agency perspective if you can support on this one, but Alex from the audience has asked, how can brands work with partners and cost in efficiency? So obviously a lot of budgets have been slashed at the moment, but how can they keep their offering still attractive to their partners? So could we be looking at things like first click or CPA increases, or I suppose what's your advice there?
I'm not sure if I received the question correctly. Is it how, in a time of financial stress, can partners, vendors work better with the brands? Is that the question?
I think you phrased that much better than I did. Yeah, I think that's the gist of the question. Thank you.
Well, I could put myself and many others on the hot seat by simply saying, I've managed some pretty large budgets from the brand side, and as a brand side perspective, I'd love to work with as many partners as I can that work on a performance basis, right? So, kind of eat what you kill, take a bigger commission. I mean, the bottom line is with our industry, with the partner, affiliate, performance, whatever term you want to put in front of our aspect of marketing, which by the way, I love. The interesting thing is that, you can think about creative ways to take maybe larger commissions or other kind of payments or structures around just how things are working, right? It's not about retainers or flat fees in a time like this for everybody if you're nimble enough to do that. I mean, the bottom line is, this channel, although might be considered a third party to some extent or an aggregator or whatever, there's still a lot of direct relationship with the customer versus maybe some, and I don't mean to put any of my peers on the spot here, but I'll just use Expedia as the example. Expedia kind of owns the relationship with the customer, right? So anyone who books through Expedia has minimal interaction with the actual brand. With the performance partner affiliate kind of dynamic, the customer then does have a lot more experience and exposure directly to the brand. So how you play you being me, really being the third party, how we play more of a host or facilitator and get compensated based on like performance or satisfaction. It can be done creatively, especially in a time like right now where it's unprecedented, where we're breaking rules. I'll say one more bit about it, right? Legacy rules are just aching to be broken, right? Look at, we've all seen the examples of how Amazon put Borders and books out of business, or diapers or whatever, or how Expedia, the biggest travel company, or Airbnb don't own any hotels, and Uber, biggest taxi company, doesn't own any taxis, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, those are all major disruptors, right? They've all done something that traditionally was just legacy, something we'd never touch. What can we do about taxis? They suck. We hate getting in, sitting with a stranger and having to give them a credit card. We hate that. And then all of a sudden, Uber and Lyft come out. My point is, if there was ever a time for opportunity for creativity and disruption and challenging the legacy, it's now. I'll stop.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. The next top voted question from the panel, which Berto, I don't know if actually you can support on from a brand last minute perspective. So the question here is, how can publishers promote destinations that are currently closed to tourists in a way that's sensitive enough that it doesn't anger any local residents?
So as I say, I think the way to do it is being really practical and more like sensitive on it. You can promote it always showing that you have interest and protect them on the safety net. So it could be great if you could add a little bit more about this on the content. Also, you can promote like long-term or like future holidays. No, it doesn't have to be in 3 months. It can be promoting content for the end of the year or next year, because at the end, I can understand that maybe the residents can be sensitive, but also the travelers want to keep wishing with the future holidays. No, they can keep dreaming on these destinations that they had to stop until the situation would be good again. So I just think we need to change the perspective and try to make it more flexible and safety oriented, offering a lot of possibilities, as many as we can to the client. And I think if we do it like that, also the resident is gonna keep quite cool. Also because most of the destinations that the traveler wants to go are destinations that live from the tourists, no? Like Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal. We need the tourists. So we can believe that I'm coming from Spain, for example, know my situation. We need the tourists. And for me, it's not a sensitive topic in a way that I don't feel bad if someone is promoting Spain, because I know a lot of people are living from it. It's actually nice that people will to travel again to Spain. So yeah, I think with a different kind of perspective on the content, we can perfectly make it.
Perfect, thank you, Berta. Colin, you mentioned earlier the 14-day quarantine from the UK, and I think a question's actually come in response of that. So the question is, what impact will the 14-day quarantine that the UK government is proposing have on current trends?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's quite fast moving, and until we see it in action next week, it will be very difficult to know exactly what impact it will have. We may find that people are still willing to travel, even with the idea that they're going to have to self-isolate. There's also some talk that there's going to be some exceptions to the rule, in terms of the jobs that you do. You might still be able to travel on the tube back from the airport, which does somewhat make a mockery of it in terms of how it will be implemented. But I think what you'll find is that it may be a short-term measure. So I think although it will potentially kick in next week, as I said, while the Foreign Office advice is still that you can't, you shouldn't travel overseas, I think by the end of June, the beginning of July, you'll start seeing that some travel is taking place. Who that will be and where they go, we will have to wait and see. But I think from our perspective, we're already starting to see a bit of an uplift in terms of traffic. And that's across the board in terms of destinations, the kind of typical ones that people have been talking about. So Greece, Cyprus, Malta, Spain, and even Italy. I think people will be craving to get away, and I think they will. Some people will be prepared to deal with the quarantine anyway. So I think it's a little bit of a smokescreen. I don't think it will have as much impact. We will find out in the next few days as to whether or not, when more information is published, whether we see numbers drop or whether that we're actually starting to see bookings. And to be honest, throughout the lockdown period, we've actually seen holiday bookings coming in. They've been at a lower level. A couple of times we've sold, £16,000 holidays, and you think, wow, who's sitting at home during this lockdown booking a £16,000 holiday? But clearly somebody is, and I think that goes back onto the point just made. It's not about just travel next week or next month. People can book 2021, they can book winter, they can book even far into the future. So I think that in itself is quite encouraging, that people are looking forward and looking to book there. The challenge for a publisher like ourselves is that, as you know, the majority of affiliate programs pay in travel after the person has traveled. Yeah. So that offers a slight issue moving forward, going back to the kind of payment model question that you had a moment ago, and the fact that, in terms of cash flow for a publisher like ourselves, if we're only selling holidays for 2021 or this winter coming up, that we're not going to earn that money for many months' time. So I think as an industry in itself, we need to try and think of how we can kind of counteract that. And I think there is a conversation to be had to maybe find a solution that is fair for publishers, but also doesn't leave merchants in a position where they're having to have huge expenditure up front, knowing with the idea that a traveller might still cancel their holiday. So I think I'll leave that out there. It's quite an interesting point. It could be quite a good discussion point for a later time.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Colin. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to tackle one more question from the audience Q&A before we wrap up. Kate, I wonder if I can come to you for this question, as it's around advice in terms of promotions. So, as an extension of some of the previous questions that have been asked, how can we manage travel affiliate programs and promote destinations based on travel without being insensitive to the social, political events that are currently unfolding?
Yeah, right now our slogan, for this period of time, if you translate it from Russian into English, is travel, but a little bit later. And during this time, we actually added a couple of affiliate programs of our advertisers to travel payouts, and we kind of let our affiliates know that, hey, we have a new program, and you can join the program right now and promote the services later. And I think that it makes sense. And you, as a travel brand, can just use this time. Yeah, of course, your affiliate's not going to bring you any bookings, a lot of bookings right now, but at least you can just gather this pool of affiliates who will bring bookings later. So it makes sense.
Perfect, thank you. Cool, so I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone that has joined today. So a thank you to our audience, and thank you for really engaging with the content and submitting some great questions. And of course, a huge thank you to everyone on our panel today, all of the information and advice you guys have given has been really interesting, and it's been great to hear all of your own opinions. For any more trends and insights, please do check out our Awin and our Share a Style website. We also have a coronavirus hub, which has lots of information, advice, as well as live sector level reporting. And in a couple of weeks' time, my colleague Jessie in the US will be hosting a fashion-specific sector webinar similar to today. So you can sign up to that or see any pre-recordings of previous webinars on our website also. That's all from me. All that's left to say is thank you again so much, everyone, for your time. Take care. And if you do want to catch up at all, please do reach out. My contact details are on the screen now. Thank you very much and goodbye.